With the changes coming in the patch, it's time for us to start theory crafting how all the different builds, especially ones that I have on max roll that people are going to be using as guides, are going to be changing and how we're going to be optimizing them. So I figured we would start off with the Bloodlance Necromancer. Now keep in mind, this is complete theory craft. Nobody gets to play in a PTR, but based off of what the developers have said, my understanding of how the game works, and our breakdown of how all of these different damage buckets are going to interact, I think I have a fairly good understanding of the changes that need to be made to the build so it's as highly functional as possible walking into Season 2. So what I have here is the endgame version of the build as I currently see it. This doesn't incorporate any of the new uniques. In fact, it's not using any uniques at all. It's just going to be legendary gear that you'll be able to go get with aspects that you'll be able to go get. And then once you drop additional uniques, I'm going to have a whole version of that build later once we have the chance to actually see their stats and test them out. Now, luckily, I'm going to go a little bit further than I normally would here. Obviously, I have the build link, which I'll include down in the description below. But on top of that, I'm also going to start maintaining a consistent list of all the builds in my public Discord. It's going to have the links to all the build planners as I update them. I'll obviously also show the max roll guides once they've been updated with the appropriate information. So basically this stuff will go from theory crafting into build guides down here. And then on top of that, I'm going to include any of the resources that I create across all the different data sheets that I have and include it here as well. So if you're not in the Discord, consider joining. The link is also down in the description so you can come get this stuff whenever you need it. But I'm going to show you every single thing about the build, the skill tree, the Paragon tree, all the different stats and gear, how we build everything, our Book of the Dead. Everything will have a timestamp down below so you can skip around to see the various parts that you want. Obviously, there's not going to be any gameplay because we're not in Season 2 yet, so I can't show you the differences. While ignoring everything else here, I just want to show you what the numbers look like for the free bonuses that we're going to be getting now. So a level 100 Necromancer has a base life of 8,000. This character that we currently have has 23,000 life, and that's probably not even the maximum of what we're going to get in game, but it's pretty close to representative of that. And based off of how much Fortify you have, you can gain up to almost 600 additive damage here. And then based off of how much bonus life you have above your base life, we're getting close to another 400 additive damage. So just these two stats alone are getting us nearly 1,000 additive overpower damage before any of our other stats. So it's pretty crazy how powerful they've made overpower in comparison to the other damage buckets, which have largely lost a lot of their power. Another super important thing to understand about how this build is going to function differently is the changes to Rathma's Vigor. Basically, it used to say before, you gain 10% maximum life, that's gone, and every 12 seconds you get a guaranteed overpower. Now what it says is every 12 seconds you get a guaranteed overpower, but by healing via a blood orb, a thing that the Bloodlance Necromancer does very easily with the aspect gore quills, as long as you can heal up to your base life with a blood orb, you're going to reduce that overpower counter by 2 seconds. So theoretically you could overheal 5 times and then overpower again within a 2-second period if you could actually cast spells that quickly. So we're going to be prioritizing attack speed, healing stats, which is something that you probably never did before, and then a ton of additional maximum life to make our healing as effective as possible. The skill Transfusion, one of the passives in our tree, used to say your minions get blood orb healing, and now what it says is you have a chance to proc a blood orb based off of lucky hit. This is going to go forward to generating as many blood orbs as possible, so we're going to be maxing this out. Similarly, Gruesome Mending used to say that you had increased healing if you were below 50% life. This was another passive that you basically just never picked up, but now it just says you gain bonus healing. So that's going to go a long way to increase our blood orb healing, so we can overheal our base life whenever we pick up a blood orb, so we can reduce the cooldown on Rathma's Vigor to get free overpowers. Okay, so now that we've gotten all of like the nerdy data stuff out of the way, let's go over the skill tree, because there's like pretty significant changes here that you're probably not expecting if you've been piloting a blood build before. So we're still going to be using Hemorrhage along with Acolyte's Hemorrhage to be able to generate blood orbs at an incredible rate and a bunch of essence at an incredible rate. And immediately we have a huge difference here. One, we're actually maxing out Bloodlance. Since our damage is now a regular damage bucket, it interacts with all the other damage buckets. It means that all of a sudden we care about our weapon damage as well as caring about the base skill damage as well, because it's not like Overpower is going to have this weird interaction with only the rank 1 skill damage coefficient. It's just an additive damage multiplier now. So we're going to max out Bloodlance. We're still going to pick up Supernatural so that we have that guaranteed overpower and Blood Orb creation, which is so much more important nowadays. We're going to be picking up a single point into Hewed Flesh, being able to generate a corpse whenever we're attacking a boss so that we can apply corpse tendrils to get our crit modifier there. Since all of a sudden we care about crit invulnerable now, at least on this build, we're going to be transitioning into a much heavier crit damage build once you unlock some of these different uniques from the uber bosses. Right now, don't worry too much about it though. Blood Mist creates corpses again to be able to corpse tendrils. Just being able to bring everything into a pack makes our gore quills altogether that much more efficient. We're able to gun down packs that much faster. We're still picking up Abhorrent Decrepify because we want to be reducing Bone Storm's cooldown as often as possible, since Bone Storm gives us a huge amount of our survivability. This is super important, just on top of also giving them, damage reduction and also slowing them, having a chance to stun them. It activates Amplify as well, so that we have an additional damage multiplier whenever we apply Decrepify. And then we're picking up Death's Reach because theoretically we should always be distant from these monsters. And then probably one of the biggest departures from what we used to do previously, we're going to be maxing out Gruesome Mending for that huge amount of healing so we can reduce our overpower cooldown. We're going to be picking up Transfusion so that we can get that lucky hit chance to be able to generate blood orbs, especially on bosses, which is super helpful. Still maxing out Tides of Blood to get that huge double bonus to overpower damage when we're healthy. Maxing out Coalesce Blood for the increased damage when we're using a blood skill. And then maxing out Drain Vitality. The big difference with Drain Vitality is that it used to fortify for base life, and now it's going to fortify for maximum life. So while a Fortify build wants to Fortify as quickly as possible, we're basically going to almost be like doubling or tripling our effective Fortify ability, since it's based off our max life now. So it's going to be a lot easier to reach Fortify and to maintain Fortify to have the biggest total bonus to our overpower damage. Single point into Corpse Tendrils, and then obviously Corpse Tendrils generates blood orbs. Yes, you could use Vulnerable to get the free 1.2 multiplier, but it is by far and large much more important to generate blood orbs here. The build was already super blood orb focused, and now it's even more blood orb focused. Then coming down to the bottom of it, obviously Bone Storm with Supreme Bone Storm, picking up 3 points into Inspiring Leader for the additional increased attack speed. This also got a slight buff, so it only takes 2 seconds to gain that increased attack speed. And then Standalone for the damage reduction, and then Memento Mori. We're gonna have to reinvestigate how Memento Mori works. It should be very simple. It just increases your sacrifice bonuses, meaning that you are going to gain more critical strike chance and more overpower damage. But it basically used to double dip and for whatever reason just get you more than what you were supposed to get. That's why the sacrificial aspect was so powerful. And then obviously we're picking up Rathma's Vigor here. Now that you understand the skills, let's go ahead and look at the gear, because the aspects are obviously going to play off the skills, and a lot of the stats are going to be very different here, and I'm going to try to truncate how much information I'm throwing at you just to make it as simple as possible. First off, we're using a big old two-handed weapon. Now this one is probably the biggest point of contention, because there's a very good argument to be made for using a one-hander and a shield to get even more max life, to be able to increase all of our bonuses, increase our healing, etc. But hear me out here. One, the item power going up to 925 as a maximum and then being able to get up to 950 means that we are highly incentivized to use the biggest total weapon base damage possible on this build. We now care about weapon damage, and having the biggest damage number here means that we're multiplying it as efficiently as possible when we get a bunch of intelligence. Not only that, the critical strike damage modifier on a two-handed weapon has now been doubled, so that's just like literally free extra damage once we evolve into the crit focus version of this build. You're also able to get the biggest bonuses to intelligence and all stats. We want a ton of all stats, and we want a ton of intelligence. One, we're gonna have to deal with resistances in this season. So similar to just being able to mitigate all of the changes, we also want to be maximizing things. The all stats make sure that we can hit a ton of our Paragon nodes in our Paragon tree. And then on top of that, it gets us additional overpower from willpower, it gets us additional crit chance from dexterity, etc. Also helps to mitigate a little bit of our armor loss. Then on top of that, obviously a huge overpower affix here, and then a big core skill damage. We don't really care about vulnerable, we don't really care about crit. We're probably not even going to transition into picking up crit damage once we actually get the unique items that we do. Your weapon's probably going to look very similar to this moving forward. Obviously, we're putting rubies in it for more overpowered damage, and then this is where I'm putting gore quills. A lot of people have been asking about Bloodseeker, a lot of people have been asking about Hungry Blood. Gore quills already outperformed both of those previously, and while the damage calculation is going to be a lot different now, making sure that every single blood orb that we consume with gore quills is firing 100% effective blood lance at a target means that we are maximizing our damage to the best of our ability. Okay, a lot of things here are going to look pretty similar to what they did before: maximum life and total armor and cooldown reduction. The big change here is healing received. We're going to try to put healing received onto a couple different pieces of gear. I'm not sure if it's quite overkill at this this point, we're going to have to see how often you're able to heal for your base life off of blood orbs, whether or not it aggregates. Again, I would really love a PTR, but at the very least, I'm playing around with it right now. We're also tossing rupees into all of our gear. And then here's where we're putting disobedience, which also got buffed to offset the loss of armor's dual resistance against physical and elemental damage. For the armor, maximum life, damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction. You could swap out any one of these for armor. And then this is where I'm putting might. You're going to be using hemorrhage all of the time because it's one of the easiest ways for you to generate as much essence as possible when you have run out of blood orbs. And getting that additional 20% damage reduction again helps to shore up some of the loss of damage reduction from the fact that armor isn't dual resistant anymore and we have to deal with resistances. For the gloves, there are a couple different options here, but obviously taking ranks in Blood Lance, attack speed, and then overpower damage. The overpower damage is like maybe super important. If the Memento Mori bug continues to drastically overperform on your overpower additive damage, you want to have as much of it as possible. If not, you can always put crit chance here once you move over to the other build, or you can put lucky hit chance here so that the lucky hit chance to generate primary resource whenever you hit something is working more often for you. This is where I'm putting Grasping Veins. Grasping Veins has become more important for the build just because, one, you can actually benefit from the 1.5 multiplier when you successfully crit, but also that crit multiplier when you do crit gets you another 1.4 multiplier. And then on top of that, just having the free 20% crit here and the 20% crit from Bone Storm means that on this base build right now, we're sitting at 60% chance to crit with nothing else really going for it. For the pants, Blood Orb, healing, damage reduction, and maximum life. You can swap out damage reduction for armor. This is where we're putting Shielding Storm. Best defensive aspect in the game, no question. For the boots, this is where there's probably going to be some questions based off of how easy it is for us to cap our res, but bare minimum, you want movement speed here. I put Blood Orb healing, essence cost reduction, which is super important, and then ranks to corpse tendrils, just so that cooldown is managed a lot easier, and we're not as reliant on Abhorrent Decrepify all the time to be able to spam it. That being said, needing to put two big 65% resistance values here may absolutely be a requirement depending on the content that you're looking to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody just used movement speed, essence cost reduction, and then 2 res on their boots. And then obviously we want to be using Ghost Walkers. Not only is it really good because overpowering reduces the cooldown of Blood Mist, you basically have Blood Mist off of cooldown all of the time. We're also going to use a Vampiric Power to gain us Unstoppable even more often when we use Evade. So that's why you definitely want max Evade charges here as well. For the Amulet, we do want to eventually replace this with the new generic unique amulet that drops off of Duriel. That being said, we probably can't assume that we do have access to that. So we're looking for essence cost reduction, movement speed, bonus to Tides of Blood as the strongest skill that you can get here. I personally went with damage reduction, and then here's where we're putting Rathma's Chosen. When you overpower for 4 seconds, you gain 75% increased attack speed. That is massive, and since we're basically going to be overpowering every like 3 or 4 attacks, maybe even more often than that, you should have 100% uptime on Rathma's Chosen as long as there are monsters for you to fight. For the rings, overpower damage, maximum life, blood orb healing, and lucky hit chance, I would probably eventually swap over lucky hit chance to the crit chance later on. It's maybe the overpower damage here, but on top of that, we're going to be using Potent Blood. Potent Blood says 20 essence whenever you heal off of a blood orb. That being said, right now it says when you're at full life, it's going to be changed to when you're healthy. So you're going to be able to benefit from this so much easier. And honestly, throughout the entirety of season 1, I never dropped a max roll of Potent Blood. I only had the Codex of Power Potent Blood, and I never had essence problems. For the other ring, this is where we're putting Untimely Death. Now here's a question. Untimely Death needs you to overheal based off your percentage of maximum life to gain a bonus to your overpowered damage. Depending on how this multiplier works with the additive damage, it might not be as strong as it was before. It might actually be stronger than it was before. But the big question is whether or not you can overheal that much in between each overpower. We're going to kind of be racing against the clock. Can I heal off my blood orbs enough to max out the bonus, because I need to overheal by 120% to get the biggest bonus, before my next overpower goes off? If we're overpowering way too fast, this thing's probably not going to be super valuable for us, and we're going to want to actually swap this over to Sacrificial to get the biggest total bonus to our overpower multipliers. So it depends. This is going to need some testing. Either one of them works really well. It will also slightly change which vampiric powers you use, but I have little notes about which ones you want to use, so you can just take a quick look at those later. And then for our Book of the Dead, There are a couple different options here. One, once you're swapped over to crit chance, you probably want to have crit chance from your skeleton skirmishers. That being said, being able to sacrifice our defenders for their upgraded version of 20% all resistance, which then hits Memento Mori and sacrificial aspect, would probably shore up any of your resistance issues. So that depends on how easy it is for us to cap. The developers say you can do it at level 80 without min-max gear. I've done the math. I don't think that you can. That's why we currently have diamonds in all of our jewelry, but you very well may need to use 3 different of the topaz, ruby, sapphire, emerald, etc. to be able to actually get bigger bonuses to individual resistances, along with 2 resistances on your boots. So it's a little bit up in the air, but it's probably defenders to start, and then skirmishers once you have everything min-maxed. We're obviously going to be sacrificing our bone mages for the overpower bonus here. This probably is going to be working differently than it did before. It was kind of double dipping with Memento Mori, like I said previously. I think it's just going to be a 1.4 multiplier. This one also actually got nerfed, so I think it's 25% now. But I think it's just going to be a base multiplier if you overpower, as opposed to this thing that's like multiplying against your additive overpower damage and doubling up on it. Again, we're going to have to test that out. And then for the golem, we're going to be sacrificing blood golem for the big increase to our maximum life here. Now for the Paragon tree, I'm not going to walk through every single option here. We're using sacrificial glyph, corporeal glyph, control glyph, blood drinker, and dominate. Dominate because it says overpower damage, sacrificial because it says since I don't have minions out, I get a 1.1 multiplier. And then on top of that, it's a magic glyph, so I can get additional willpower and res from this board. Corporeal has also been swapped over to a magic node enhancing glyph, so this is going to give a 1.1 multiplier since all of our damage is physical, and then also going to be able to increase the overpower nodes here, the additional dex nodes here, and some of the blood orb healing and willpower nodes so that we can hit a lot of the requirements that we have. The control glyph is probably the one that I'm like the least married to. It is just good because once corpse tendrils hits, we get this big additive damage bonus and then a 1.2 multiplier when they're all stunned. That being said, it doesn't work on bosses, which is the only thing that Bloodlance builds in the past used to have problems with. So I might swap this out for something else, just a generic multiplier that works against bosses. It's kind of hard to say right now, but you'll notice that we're going out to a ton of rare nodes here. One, just be able to pick up like more all res to be able to shore up our issues there. Being able to go out and pick up more overpower damage, which is typically in the weirdest parts of any board that you go to. Reaching out to different little areas to be able to pick up more maximum life, which is obviously really important for us. And then also increasing the amount of like generic damage nodes that we're picking up since it now works with overpower, whereas previously it just didn't. But feel free to go ahead and look through the boards here. I'm not even sure that this is strictly better than the ones that I already have on max roll, because I am losing out on a couple things to be able to pick up interesting stuff, like blood orbs now give us a 1.15 multiplier. You never picked it up before because it didn't work with overpower, but now it does. And if we're going to be picking up all these blood orbs, it's probably good enough, but maybe it just doesn't perform as well as just getting straight maximum life. We'll have to see. Now, welcome to my giant data sheet for all of the different vampiric powers and what builds I think walking into season 2 will or will not use it. Yes, it's a little bit of an eyesore. I tried to make it like as dull as I possibly could so it wouldn't burn out your eyes, but you want to specifically be looking at Bloodlance here. I'll run you through it. On the left, these are all of the powers that either should be used on the build depending on the circumstance or have an opportunity to be used on the build. Keep in mind, you can only use 5 total vampiric powers, and depending on how you switch them up, you may only end up using like 4 major ones or 3 major ones and 2 minor ones. So what I have listed here also are the requirements. These are all of the non-major ones. Then once you get down to the ones that cost 6, those are the major powers. So I have just a base breakdown whether or not I think it's pretty decent. Then I have auto include. What does auto include mean? It means if you could, you would use this power on the build. I have a couple notes here, like if you're using minions, there's a chance that you would use Feed the Coven on the build. I'm probably going to be messing around with the blood minion build just to give you an idea. Then we have my recommendations. These are the ones that I think you should use. So you'll see that there are always 5. And then here I have a maybe. And then on top of that, I have a why should you use it in case it's unintuitive. And a couple notes here, but I just want to break them down. First off, we have Ravenous. I also have all of them listed at the end of the table in case you want to go take a look. But right here, Ravenous says that you have a 20% lucky hit chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your movement speed. So if you have base movement speed, this gives you 40% attack speed. So that's obviously heinously powerful on an overpower build for getting back your resource and being able to proc as many overpowers as possible. For maybe, we had Sanguine Brace. This one's pretty interesting. I would want to use it with the new amulet, but basically what Sanguine Grace says is that you are going to, whenever you kill a monster, you're going to fortify. We no longer need that much fortify since all of our fortify works off of maximum life as opposed to base life. But what it also says is that if you have half of your life in fortify, you gain crit chance. So this is just kind of like free crit chance and also a good way to add to your ability to fortify. So that's a maybe depending on whether or not you're using the amulet. Then we have Undying. Undying says whenever you kill a monster, you're going to heal. Seems pretty good on a build that wants to be overhealing as much as possible. And this is going to help us be able to proc Untimely Death more effectively. So if you're not using Untimely Death, you probably don't want to use Undying. You would swap out to something else based off how you've built your personal version of Bloodlance. We have Blood Boil here, a major power. Blood Boil says when a core skill overpowers, it's going to spawn 3 blood drops. These blood drops cause an explosive damage when you pick them up. And on top of that, every 20 seconds, you gain an additional overpower. So that's on top of the every 12 seconds, we're going to overpower, and on top of the every 6 Bloodlance casts we're going to overpower. You see how it adds up pretty quickly here. Metamorphosis, I think Metamorphosis is just an auto include on everything, but it says that when you evade through targets, you're going to become unstoppable for 4 seconds. You're going to deal 160% weapon damage as physical damage to them, and you're also going to apply Vampiric Curse. So if you're looking for a way to apply Vampiric Curse, be able to proc that later with Blood Mist releasing the cursed souls to get that extra damage, here's a free way of doing it. Becoming unstoppable here also works with our Ghostwalker ability, and also just having a second version of Unstoppable on a Necromancer is so huge because tying yourself to Blood Mist as your only unstoppable source actually can get you into pretty hot water sometimes, since the monsters just kind of walk along with you and go straight back to hitting you the moment that you get out of it. And then lastly, we're using Moonrise. If you're not using Untimely Death, you probably want to drop Undying if you're using this one, but what Moonrise says is that hitting an enemy with a basic skill grants you attack speed. That attack speed works for everything, but on top of that, upon reaching maximum stacks, you're going to gain a bunch of basic skill damage, which isn't the most important thing, but you're also going to gain movement speed, which is obviously incredibly important on a Necromancer since they're so ding-dang slow. But even just increasing your attack speed by 20% when you're using Hemorrhage means that your Blood Lancers are going to be flying out altogether that much faster. So I definitely think that these are probably the best combination of total vampiric powers to maximize the potential for Blood Lance. Especially since we're using a two-hander, we're going to be a little bit slower than we were previously with the wand. So as much attack speed as we can get on the build as possible is going to go a really long way to help us to perpetually generate blood orbs, overheal, do overpower damage, etc. Like I said, I'm going to include the build link down in the description below. It's also going to be sitting in our Discord channel. You can also check out the vampire sheet. I haven't finished it for every single build, and obviously things change now that we have the patch notes. So it's currently unfinished, but at least for the Bloodlance build, I think that it's appropriately reflecting the options that you should choose. Let me know what you think about the Theorycraft build. Obviously, I'm going to be piloting this once we walk into season 2 at some point, be able to test out everything, make sure I came up with a really good build, or at the very least a build that is very competent. I do think that this build will basically succeed at just about every single content type. The only thing that I have a question mark about is Echo of Lilith, because I don't know how the majority of builds are going to look going into Echo of Lilith. Now that we don't have the barber, it's going to be harder to skip phases, etc. But I think this is going to smash all open world content, Whispers, Helltide. It'd probably do even pretty decently well in PvP since you're basically unkillable, overhealing a ton, maximizing fortify, a huge amount of defenses, etc. And at the very least, it's definitely going to be able to pilot into the new endgame bosses and hopefully help you to go farm out your very first Shaco like I'm hoping to get in my season 2 journey. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, leave a like on the video, go ahead and comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I'd love to have you around. We're going to be doing these types of deep dive theory crafting videos. I'm going to be using this to upgrade my max roll guides at maxroll.gg. So once you have it up there, you can use it all throughout this season. We're going to be keeping you as up to date as possible with every new innovation as we go through this season. We're going to be hyper prioritizing keeping those guides up to date. So I look forward to seeing you there as well. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.